You know, bourbon is so fantastic that they named a street in New Orleans and a county in Kentucky after it. Well, maybe it's the other way around, or maybe bourbon gets its name from the French dynasty of the same name. But you know, either way, bourbon is a wonderful American whiskey that occupies a top shelf at the Soaring Pig, not to mention filling many rocks glasses on a Friday and Saturday night. Now, just as when we looked at Scotch whiskey, single malt Scotch whiskey, each of the words in Kentucky Straight Bourbon have meaning. Today, we're going to look at what is Kentucky Straight Bourbon. Now, to be classed a bourbon, the mash bill, that is the mixture of grains, has to be 51% corn. When we talked about Scotch, single malt Scotch has to be 100% barley. But in the case of bourbon, to be a bourbon, it has to be 51% corn. Now, manufacturers of bourbon will mix other things in. So for example, Maker's Mark, a very popular brand of bourbon, uses 70% corn, 16% red winter wheat, which makes them a little different than others, and 14% barley. Jim Beam, which we have lots of here at the Soaring Pig, has a little higher corn content. It's 75% corn, 13% rye, and 12% barley. Now, the other word that you will find in Kentucky Straight Bourbon is straight. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to drink the bourbon straight, but you probably should because you'll enjoy the flavor more. So to be a straight whiskey, it needs 3 essential things. The whiskey needs to be distilled at a maximum of 80% alcohol by volume. The whiskey needs to be aged in new, charred American oak barrels. And the whiskey needs to be aged in those barrels for a minimum of 2 years and bottled at a minimum of 40% alcohol by volume. Now, what's interesting, although it only has to be aged for 2 years, any American whiskey that's less than 4 years has to say so on the bottle. And the last and the obvious one is Kentucky. Now, to be a bourbon, it has to be made in the United States. Just like Scotch has to be made in Scotland, bourbon has to be made in the US. But to be a Kentucky Straight Bourbon, it has to be made in Kentucky, and 90% of bourbons are. And there you have it, a definition of what Kentucky Straight Bourbon is. We hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, be sure to like, comment, share, but most of all, and most importantly, be sure to subscribe.